understanding this and just practicing this daily awareness of the three beliefs, which are lack, attachment, and control. These are the three things the ego needs to have dominance over your mind. If you don't believe you're lacking, if you don't have attachments to the world outside of you, and if you don't feel any need to control life, ego doesn't exist.
Welcome to the Angelic Frequency Podcast. We are your hosts, Cristina Aroche
and Luisa Velez, and today we were joined by Aaron Abke. He's a spiritual teacher, speaker, and creator. We talked about everything really from his early roots in Christianity to his profound exploration of A Course in Miracles, a personal favorite, so I really love that. The Law of One, 4D consciousness, you name it. It was such an interesting conversation and all guiding people towards true spiritual freedom. You hope we enjoy. Let's dive in.
Hi, Aaron. Welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you here.
So great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, thank you so much. We're thrilled to have you. We were just talking about how interesting everything you share is. So we're just loving what's going on, what's going to happen here today. And we can't wait to dive in. Maybe for our listeners and people who are not very familiar with you and your work, maybe just walk us through a very high level, your journey, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, it's a little hard to do that sometimes, only because I do kind of branch out into a lot of different subjects. And that's because I grew up as a third generation pastor's son in evangelical Christianity, was following that trajectory until about 23. I was going to follow my dad's footsteps to become a pastor, and I went to kind of the number one sort of evangelical university in America called Oral Roberts University in Tulsa. Graduated there with a bachelor's degree in music and theology and started my first full-time pastoring role. And then around 23 or 24, I kind of had this big awakening out of religion, which had really started like 5 or 6 years prior in my late teens, where I'd be reading, the Bible, and as my cognitive development is increasing with age, I'm like, I never really thought about this, but some of this stuff, when you stack it together, doesn't really make any sense. And that started increasing until, again, 23, 24, when I got my first full-time pastoring role at a church in San Jose. And I'm the full-time worship pastor at this church. And all of a sudden, I have this big existential crisis where I fully kind of blew up my religious faith and decided I didn't believe any of this stuff anymore. I mean, I believed the core message of the Bible and Jesus' teachings, but all of the dogmatic fundamentalism and stuff just was so clear to me. Like, this is all man's nonsense that was made up centuries and centuries after Jesus died. And if I want to really follow Jesus, I actually have to leave Christianity to do so. And so I didn't expect that to happen in my life. And that was kind of world inverting, if you can imagine. And so I started making YouTube videos, what would that be, 4 or 5 years later, on deconstructing Christianity. But what happened in between that period was that I kind of jumped headlong into Eastern philosophy and mysticism and Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, the Eastern traditions, and was studying these philosophies that were making a lot more sense to me than Christianity did. Like, they had logical consistency, which I felt was lacking in my former religion. But they didn't totally have the kind of heartfelt, passionate devotion to God, love of God, the bhakti yoga that I'd came to love in Christianity. Because, I was a worship leader, right? I love pouring my heart out to God and singing to God and stuff. And so I did end up coming back full circle to Christianity, or the teachings of Jesus, more of the mystical perspective of Christianity. And that's when I started my YouTube channel at 28 years old and started making deconstruction videos to help other questioning Christians find satisfying answers to these questions that I had been wrestling with for over a decade. And I know how painful it can be when you can't logically answer certain questions about your belief system, and yet you're so passionate and devoted to your faith, but there's all these things that if you were really in a debate, like, you wouldn't have a clue how to answer some of these questions. And that really bothered me, and I wanted to help other people, other Christians, who were making that transition. And to my surprise, some of my videos started doing really, really well, and I started gaining all these followers on YouTube, and they were wanting more content. I love your stuff, more. And so I just sort of within a 6-month period realized, gosh, man, like I guess I should quit my job and like go full time, YouTube. And I was working as a personal trainer at Google for 4 years at that point. I was a fitness trainer for 8 years and worked at Google for 4, and actually had my big spiritual awakening at Google in the middle of the workday, which is a funny story.
Wow.
Yeah, so we can get into that if you guys want, but to
Please,
wrap it all up,
we need to
have you
know
guys
now.
not heard that story?
No.
Okay. I've told it so many times on every single podcast I've ever done. Like I always assume everybody out there knows my story, but happy to get into it. So that's the summary of my journey of what led me to where I am today is, I've been kind of all over the spiritual stratosphere, so to speak, and really have come back full circle to what I call now the Jesus way and the philosophy that I think Jesus was actually teaching, which had nothing at all to do with confessing him as Lord, believing in his death and resurrection to be saved. Jesus didn't teach any of that nonsense. He was very clear. The way to God is to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's what I call the Jesus way. And that's what I teach today on YouTube.
Wow, that's incredible. I really love that story. And by the way, it's 1:11 right now Pacific time as we're filming this, and it
Look at
just feels
that.
like so divine as you shared that, because one of the things that I was going to say is that I feel like the connection with Jesus has been such a huge fundamental part of my personal journey. I know for Luisa as well. I know for many of our listeners, it's such a huge part of this journey, I feel, of awakening. And it's exactly that point, like you were speaking to, of how it's actually, what if what's shared in the Bible isn't the full truth or the full story? And when you get to begin to develop this relationship with Jesus, at least in my experience, I feel like it's sometimes hard to describe, like the level of love that is there, and how that shows up. And for me personally, especially in the last, I would say, I guess at this point, it's almost the last 6 months, maybe 5 to 6 months, I feel like he's been coming through extra strong than usual. And I'm curious, Aaron, to know your perspective or your experience with this, but it feels like he has been coming through more and more and more in a way where I feel his energy is saying, like, I want people to know the real me or the real truth or the real teachings or something. Like, that's just what's coming through right now as I'm sharing that.
Yeah, I'm right on page with you on that one for sure. That is the reason I started the Jesus Way podcast. Was it this year or last year? I don't remember anymore. But recently I started this podcast because of what you just said. I've felt strongly and kind of viscerally in my being that the time is now for the truth to come to light. And one of the other things we teach on the Jesus Way podcast very heavily is the historicity of the Christian movement, and something that almost literally nobody knows, but it's just right in plain sight in all the history textbooks and the patristics. Scholars all know it and talk about it, which is that between around 30 AD, after the crucifixion of Jesus, through the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, there was about a 40-year period, which was sort of the golden era of original Christianity, which looked very, very different than the sort of Roman Christian or Catholicism that we know today. And scholars call it, for lack of a better term, Jewish Christianity. Now, when most people hear Jewish Christianity, they think of Jews for Jesus, right? Which are basically Pauline Christians who also have some Judaic roots, right? So they're kind of doing both. This Jewish Christianity was not Pauline at all. And when I say Pauline, by the way, many people know that 2/3 of the New Testament is penned under a man named Paul of Tarsus, or Saul of Tarsus. And we talk a lot about this as well, that Saul, who later was named Paul, was a Hellenistic diaspora Jew from Asia Minor, who was not a Semitic Jew, who did not ever meet Jesus, and who Jesus' own disciples and his first Nazarene followers vehemently opposed and considered him an apostate from the law and a false prophet and somebody who corrupted the teachings of Yeshua. And so Christianity today, based on its kind of original source of Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church, they pretty much just grabbed all of Paul's teachings about Jesus and formed a religion around Paul's teachings, which, in my opinion, and the opinion of many scholars, is in stark contrast to Jesus's teachings. Because again, Paul was a Greek-speaking Hellenistic diaspora Jew living somewhere in Asia Minor, Tarsus, and near Turkey. And Jesus was a Hebrew-speaking Semitic Jew from the Galilean region. So they come from two different cultures. And so you add the fact that Paul never met Jesus and was very, very pagan in his philosophies. He essentially turned Jesus's teachings into a Greco-Roman mystery religion, a very Gnostic type of mystery religion about the secret knowledge of you've got to confess Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. Believe in your brain that he died and rose again on this certain day in history. And then with the combination of those two things, you will go to heaven when you die and not hell. And that's Romans 10:9. That's Paul's teaching. And you go, oh, okay, cool. So confess and believe. So where did Jesus say that? Let me see here. Matthew, weird. Nothing in Matthew. Mark, nope, nothing in Mark. Luke, no. John, no. Jesus never said any of that? And this was like a scandalous, explosive revelation to me because it's something I always took for granted, as most Christians do, right? They just kind of take for granted that all these beliefs we have today, Trinitarianism and the virgin birth and confess and believe, yeah, Jesus would have thumbs up those beliefs in the first century. And the truth is obviously that Jesus would have no freaking clue what you were talking about if you brought up the Trinity to him. Jesus, do you know you're the second person of the Trinity, consubstantial, co-equal with the Father and the Holy Spirit? He would be like, yo, get this pagan polytheism out of my face. I follow the Torah. You know what I mean? That's what Yeshua of Nazareth would have said, the historical person. So I start realizing all these things and I'm like, gosh, how do I get this message out? And I just started making content on this message. And very quickly, in a very amazing way, the universe started sort of gathering to me other people who are also pioneering this message, who have like small channels on YouTube, or some of them are scholars. Some of them are just other people like me who are passionate about biblical studies. But we've sort of formed this group of about 8 or 9 of us now who are like all in to study this history of the Nazarene Christian movement that flourished between 30 to 70 AD. And it was a very Jewish form of Christianity, which believed that Jesus was not literally God who came down from heaven like some kind of Greek demigod, like Apollos or Perseus or whatever. Jesus was not a God who came down from heaven to the first disciples of Jesus. He was the Davidic Messiah that the Bible foretold. He was the Messiah the Jews were waiting for. And every single scripture, without exception in the Old Testament, that speaks of the Davidic Jewish Messiah, speaks of him as a man, a person who will come and who isn't God, who is working for God or a messenger of God. And there's a distinction there. And so the first followers of Jesus would have thought it was absolute blasphemy to say that he was literally God in human flesh. That's an anti-Jewish belief. Jewish thinking has no such ideology in it, that a person can be God. And it doesn't even make sense philosophically, metaphysically, or ontologically to say, how can the creator of the universe localize itself into one physical body? And then like, who's out there sustaining the rest of the universe if only Jesus is God? It's just a crazy belief. And yet it took hold and became the world's biggest religion. And so it's like, wow, we've diverted so far from the Hebrew Semitic God-intoxicated rabbi, Yeshua the Nazarene, and his original teachings. How do we get back to the source? Well, probably we should just start teaching what Jesus taught. And when you look at what Jesus taught about salvation, is clear and unequivocal and unambiguous. All 3 times Jesus is asked in the New Testament, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? It's like, okay, this is the question, right? This is the question you ask the Savior, Jesus. How do I enter eternal life? And guess what Jesus says? He doesn't say anything Paul said or anything you'll ever hear a pastor on Sunday in any church you pick say. Jesus said, if you want to enter eternal life, keep the commandments. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. And the greatest of all, love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus also said, and if you do this one commandment, by the way, love God, love neighbor, you fulfill the entire law. And that's it. So it's like, why don't we hear Christian pastors saying what Christ said on Sundays when they're asked, how do I get saved? Why don't they say, keep the commandments, love your neighbor as yourself? Because that's what Jesus said. And so you dig into it and these things start to get under your skin a little bit. And you're like, hey, we're literally like disrespecting Yeshua the Nazarene by not teaching his actual philosophy. Jesus was clear. He doesn't need to die on the cross so God can forgive you. God doesn't need an act of violence and bloodshed so he can forgive people. Jesus says repentance is the forgiveness of sins. Repent and God forgives you. He told many parables about it. He told people their sins were forgiven long before he went to the cross. Like, this was obviously not Jesus's own idea, but ideas that formulated later. So we're trying to sort of correct the record, if you will.
That's so interesting and such a rich story. And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of people on their path to awakening is how do you sift through all the misconceptions and how things have been filtered through different intentions and different things that happen with organized religion in place. And how do you find truth? Exactly. And how do you find God and truth? Just going through all of this mess, really, that humans made. So that brings me back to your story, actually. So because that shift from very traditional organized religion to a more expansive soul-led path. So let's go back to that moment and that awakening, and please, if you can elaborate on your awakening.
Yeah, so the brief synopsis of that was that I had left my religion at 23, and I also gotten married at 23, and we really tried hard to make it work after that for like 2 more years, and it just didn't work because I was going really hard this way, and my wife was not really making the transition with me, and a lot of the stuff I was looking into and believing was kind of scary to her. So got divorced at 26, moved back in with my parents at 26, which is also like not fun to do as a young adult. And so I've blown up my whole life. I've lost every single friend I've ever had, without exception. All of them were Christians. I had nobody in my life at all. Everyone's like, he's a heretic, he's a new ager, he's a cult leader, all this stuff. And so I'm all alone. Everyone I used to know actively judges me as being evil. And I'm divorced. I'm living back with my parents. I'm a personal trainer in the Bay Area. No friends, no social life. And it just threw me into this really awful dark night of the soul where I couldn't find meaning to my life anymore. I didn't know who Aaron was. Who's Aaron Abke, who's not a Christian? I don't know that Aaron. I don't know what he's like. So I had to rediscover myself. And that's not always an easy thing to do. But in that really intense period of depression for a couple of years in my mid to late 20s, one day I was on the balcony above the gym that I worked at Google, at the Googleplex, and I would have my lunch break every day, and I would go upstairs and listen to Eckhart Tolle or Alan Watts on my headphones while I ate lunch. And I would just watch the clouds, and it was the only time of my day that I felt a little bit of peace. And the rest of the day, my mind's just going crazy and torturing me, right? And so one day, probably a few months into this ritual of eating my lunch upstairs on the patio, I'm listening to a lecture from Eckhart, and he's saying things that the ego says to us. So like, if only people would be nicer to me, then I would truly be happy. Or if only people would recognize how important I am, then I could truly be happy. And he's showing the weird stipulations that ego puts on our happiness. And I started laughing because the audience would laugh each time he would say a new ego line, and then you could hear him chuckling a little bit. And I was laughing and chuckling along with this video because I'm totally appreciating the humor and the pointedness of what he's saying. I'm like, dude, he's nailing it. That's like essentially exactly what my ego says to me all day. Just nobody knows how great I am, how special I am, then I could truly be happy. And I just saw it for what a joke it all is, that I think I'm this voice in my head that even I don't like, and I can't stop it. There's no off button. There's no on button. And yet I think I'm that voice. How ridiculous. Of course I'm not that voice. If I could turn that voice off, I would press the off button immediately. So why can't I? Because I'm not that voice. It was like, duh. And I just started belly laughing on the roof. And you know how laughter can sometimes be a very powerful sort of conduit for realization. I kind of laughed myself into a temporary enlightenment because all of a sudden the doors of perception were just blown wide open. And it was almost like a curtain was pulled back and I was just like permitted into another realm. And all of a sudden, everywhere I look, I just see this devastating beauty and oneness and sacredness, and it's all perfect to such an extent that I couldn't even say or think anything about it. Just like, wow, it's all one perfect reality of which I am a part. And I'm just in awe of life. And I can't think a thought. I definitely can't suffer. I'm just kind of in this Buddha state, just blissed out. And I started weeping while I'm crying at this whole vision of what's going on. And there was a couple of software engineers eating their lunch on the other side of the balcony. And I didn't think about it then because I could have cared less at that point. But months later, when I thought back to that moment, I'm like, wow, those guys probably thought I was just on every drug imaginable, just laughing and crying and just like looking around like a newborn baby. But I had this profound awakening experience on the balcony of the Googleplex. And I spent exactly 2 weeks in that state. And I woke up on the 14th day, my alarm went off, and I was in a very toxic relationship at the time. This is how like intense the sort of samadhi state was. I was in a very toxic relationship at that point, living with my girlfriend. And, she was still doing her normal attitudes and demeaning me and all this stuff that was going on. And I could have just cared less. I was just seeing her for what she was and seeing right past the illusion of her ego and the programming. And like nothing could bother me. Nothing could throw me off my center. It was just amazing. And then I wake up 14 days later and I realized it had been exactly 2 weeks since that experience. And I had this thought in my mind, which said, wow, it's been 2 full weeks in this unbroken heavenly state. Well, gosh, I wonder if this is maybe permanent. And maybe I got enlightened 2 weeks ago, who knows? And just this little entertaining of maybe I'm enlightened. Maybe that's what this is. How else do you explain this? And it seemed like an innocent enough thought, but it was the only crack in the dam my ego needed to sneak back in. And the downward spiral began. Ego started coming back online. The suffering came back, but it came back with a vengeance. It was much worse even than before, because it's one thing to taste what hell is like and to live in hell for a while. That's awful. Nobody likes that. But let me tell you, it's a whole lot freaking worse when you've been to heaven for a while and then you go back to hell, from heaven straight into hell. That's a tough transition, my friends. And I had no choice but to do everything in my power to handle what was going on in my consciousness, or I would have jumped off a bridge or something. It was just insane what my mind was doing at that time. And it put me in this interesting position because I just experienced 2 weeks of absolute inner freedom and joy. And then I'm just thrown back into the pit of suffering and hell again. But now it's like, now I can't lie to myself anymore and say that freedom isn't available, which is what I always told myself before. Like, nah, this whole enlightenment thing, I'm sure like maybe some super rare souls get it, but it's just not possible for most people in this life. You're always going to suffer. You can't avoid suffering. So I just have to, get used to my suffering. Well, now I couldn't think those thoughts anymore. They were laughable. It's like, no, I definitely know that freedom's available. It's actually so freaking available, no one would even believe me if they knew how available it is. But you got to be willing to do what it takes to get there. And so I had these 2 big gifts from that experience, which was one, total conviction that freedom from suffering is possible and available to the human being. And number 2, just an absolute burning desire to get back to that state. No matter what it would take, I would have done anything. And those 2 ingredients were the recipe that allowed me to start truly walking out of hell and back into freedom again over the course of the next few years. And actually this book, The 3 Beliefs of Ego, is coming out in August. And this is kind of the culmination of that whole journey of this was the framework that was given to me in response to my questioning to the universe of how do I break free from my ego? How do I break free from my mind? It just has me captive like a hostage. And this understanding of, well, the ego is actually just a culmination of 3 basic beliefs. And if you just realize and become aware of these 3 beliefs and the way they affect everything you do and your thinking, you can begin eradicating their influence from your mind and find that freedom again. And as I started making that a practice every day, the proof was in the pudding. And I started to see, yeah, it's very true that without these 3 beliefs, there is no ego at all. And that's a much less formidable opponent, so to speak, to go up against when you know, hey, I'm just trying to transcend these 3 basic beliefs versus I'm trying to transcend this horrific enigma of the ego, which I have no idea what it is and how to defeat it. that's where I was before this revelation came through. So that's kind of the synopsis of my awakening at 27, and then how it led me into most of the content I teach today really comes directly from that experience.
Wow. I love that so much. And the thing that I love the most is the simplicity of, like, exactly like you said, this feeling of overwhelm, this whole entire human existence, the questioning, all that, and boiling it down to the three beliefs and transcending those, and, moving through that. Like, that just feels so, it feels more attainable in a way, or, I
Yeah,
think that's the right word. It's just like,
100%.
okay, I can actually do this.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you can't fully do it, like even if you never completely eradicate the influence of these three beliefs, you could make tremendous progress. You can alleviate a large percentage of your suffering. Like there's no losing by understanding this and just practicing this daily awareness of the three beliefs, which are lack, attachment, and control. These are the three things the ego needs to have dominance over your mind. If you don't believe you're lacking, if you don't have attachments to the world outside of you, and if you don't feel any need to control life, ego doesn't exist. That's the only three functions that the ego has.
My mind, I feel like it just blew up. I'm just like, yeah, yes, this is so good.
It's so simple. It's so interesting because I can personally relate to just, though, of course, not fully 2 weeks of having one of these experiences, but yes. And funny enough, it was also through a book that I was hearing, and then another time, yeah, maybe also another book that audiobooks are my thing. And just having that voice in my mind and that simple realization, like, oh yeah, that's right. It's that simple. And then you enter that state, but then you go right back out. And just how to break through and how to keep that connection and how to keep your ego from breaking through is just the hardest thing to do. But you're right, just being there, being one with everything, being at peace at last, and then losing it is just, you're forever looking for that connection. And the coming down and the coming back is so devastating because you just experienced, you were just free, you were just out. So coming back can be really, really sad and hard sometimes. I know we've had conversations with Cristina all the time. Like, it's so hard to come back when you're just like in that space or in meditation, connecting, and then having to come back to real life is just the hardest thing. But I love what you said, and it's so simple. So which one, in your experience, is the hardest of those beliefs to release and break through?
Yeah, I answer this very question in the book. And the answer is the third belief, control, is the most challenging belief to transcend, to see it in real life, in real time, to be aware of it, and to transcend it. And that's because it's standing on the foundation of the first two. So it's the tallest of the three, because all three beliefs, they flow downstream of each other. They connect to each other. They depend on each other. So, for example, how do I say it in the book? Lack breeds attachments, and attachments breed control, right? So if you think you're lacking, and this is the ego's kind of premise, the ego is the part of our mind that believes I'm a separate self, separate from life, the universe, other people, God, everything. I'm isolated, all alone, and I've got to figure this thing out by myself. So it's the survival mechanism in our mind, and it's served a very useful purpose for a long time in our history. But as soon as you believe you're a separate self, the first sort of belief created is I'm lacking, I'm incomplete, I don't have something I need, I'm not good enough, I'm not whatever. There's always a lack belief in the ego's mind. And so if you feel like you're lacking, it's just kind of the nature of that feeling, right? That if I think I'm missing something, I can't just sit here and be like, well, I'm missing it. That's all that there is. It's like, no, I want to go out and fill it up. I want to go out and find it. I want to go get it, whatever it is. And so that leads right into the second belief. And so I actually give like a statement for each belief to help you understand, help the reader understand like the essence of the beliefs themselves. So the belief in lack, if you could put a microphone in the belief in lack's face and say, tell us about yourself, right? The belief in lack would say, well, I am incomplete. So that's how I define it, right? I am incomplete is the first belief of the ego. And every human being who's ever lived and alive today, all of us have this belief. There's nobody who escapes it. Once I'm lacking, I go, well, maybe something out there can fulfill my lack and, satisfy this aching void I feel inside. And so the second belief of attachments, if you could put a mic in the face of attachment and say, well, what do you like? Tell us about yourself. Attachment would say, my happiness depends on outcomes. That's the second belief. The ego's second belief, fundamental belief that is the operating system that it runs on, is my happiness depends on outcomes. I cannot be happy unless there's a reason to be happy. Something good has to happen, some pleasure, some whatever. I have to go out into the world and get things that make me happy. And so being attached to the world of form is the ego's second belief that I can fulfill my lack by attaching to the things that make me feel good. And so we have that as the second. What's the third? Well, if I have to go get things in the world to fulfill my lack, and I have to go make outcomes happen in my favor, I'm in control. I'm the doer. I'm the one who's going to go out and do that. So I make life happen. I decide what happens. I choose everything I do from one moment to the next. I'm a creature of total free will. Without any outside interference, I'm in control of life. That's the ego's third belief. And it really does believe this, right? We as people are so utterly oblivious to the countless variables that happen every moment around us, from the weather to who knows how much spectrum of energy we can't see in the cosmos and the planets and the way that it causes us to think and feel and behave. There are just countless puppet strings, right, around us moving us. And yet we just think, I'm just moving myself. It's just me down here. Yet we can't see how connected we are to everything. And so that has its own host of problems. But the way that I figured out these three beliefs, by the way, was through emotions. Because the first question I started asking after that 2-week experience ended and I was suffering again was like, okay, let's just back engineer this thing one step at a time. I can sort of remember what it felt like to be free. So let me compare how I felt in those 2 weeks in that state with what I feel now and say, what's here now that wasn't there? And so the emotions that I came to see were basically just three emotions that I literally can't find another emotion I ever suffer from other than these three: sadness, anger, and fear. And in those three, you also have the flight, fight, freeze, right? Sadness is the need to escape from pain and to get away, to hide yourself, right? Anger is fight, that's obvious, and fear is freeze. And as I thought about it more and more, I thought, yeah, these are the only three negative emotions that human beings have. Every other emotion you can think of is just a different variation of one of these three, right? With sadness, there's depression, hopelessness, shame, guilt, but it's all just different flavors of sadness. With anger, there's jealousy, irritation, rage, et cetera, frustration, but it's all just anger at the end of the day. And then with fear, you've got stress, worry, anxiety, paranoia, but it's all just fear at the end of the day. So it's sadness, anger, fear. That's it. Those are the only three emotions humans suffer from. And once I was clear on that, I started asking, okay, well then why do I feel sad when certain things happen and not angry or not afraid? Why do I sometimes just feel afraid instead of feeling sad? Like there's got to be a reason why we have these three different emotions. And that question led to the realization that yes, in fact, there is. And the reason is actually a belief. In other words, these emotions arise not because something actually happens, but how we think about what happens, how we perceive what happens. So emotions are actually reflections of our perception. The way that I perceive myself in the present moment will determine what emotions I feel. And so this is what I call the emotional guidance system, which is the third chapter in the book, which explains the purpose of emotions. And they are supposed to be this kind of litmus test for perception. And so here's what it is. If I think about or perceive myself in a way that the source, God, creator, does not see me, then I will feel a negative emotion because it's my emotional being, my soul saying, incorrect, that's not true, that's not who you are. So I'm not good enough, I'm a loser, nobody likes me. I'm better than everyone. All these kinds of things will lead to some kind of negative emotion because they're not true. But if you, on the other hand, have a perception of being one with everyone, that feels freaking amazing, doesn't it? You feel joyful, expansive. If you feel, I'm just so loved, I'm so grateful, you feel positive emotions. And so it's all about how you perceive yourself. And so then I understood, okay, yeah, that makes sense. The emotions are a response to my incorrect self-perceptions. So then we tie those emotions to those three beliefs. And I started to see that sadness is the emotional response to the belief in lack. And that really checks out when you think about it. Just try and imagine how you could be sad without any feeling of lack or loss. You go, yeah, actually, I couldn't be sad without feeling lack or loss, because that's what sadness is. You're sad because you think you lost something or are lacking something that you need. And then we go to anger. What is anger but a blocked outcome, right? When you don't get your outcomes, right? My happiness depends on outcomes. That's the outcome I want. And as long as I get the outcome, I don't get angry. But as soon as life or a person or something blocks my outcome, then I get really angry. So anger is a blocked attachment, a blocked outcome. You have an outcome on the pedestal and you're not getting it. That's what anger is for. And then fear is the freeze response, because what happens when I think I'm in control of life and then life doesn't go my way? It's pretty terrifying, isn't it? When you think you don't have control or you think you're losing control, we call that a panic attack. When somebody feels like they can't breathe or like they don't have the ability to catch their breath, they'll start spiraling because I'm not in control. I can't control my breath. So the loss of control, or we never have control, but the loss of believing we have control is fear. And so those three emotions explained and showed me the three beliefs. And in that way, when you understand them, it becomes such a perfect system where you can just check in with yourself in any moment you feel a negative emotion. And if I'm feeling like a little depressed today, I don't have to wonder why I'm feeling depressed anymore. I know exactly why I'm feeling depressed. I have a lack belief. There's something I think I'm lacking. And so I could go within and say, okay, soul, tell me, what do I believe I'm lacking today? What is it that I think isn't here? And I'll look into that. And when you ask good questions, man, you get good answers. And so looking into that question, the answer appears. I'm lacking love, approval, money, success, whatever. And so I teach the reader how to requalify those beliefs when they're coming up. But the good news is you don't have to psychoanalyze yourself to death anymore, because you have these extremely intelligent mechanisms called emotions that are already pointing you exactly to the problem. But our problem is we have not known how to speak the language of our emotions until now.
Amazing. I cannot wait to get my hands on that book and read more about
Available
this.
for pre-order.
Oh, amazing. I was going to ask you that. Okay, good. We will have a link for that, in the show notes for our listeners. And, I really love the way that, first of all, the way that you explain that, it was so clear and just like makes so much sense and just so many ahas. So thank you for sharing that with us and just being so generous. With explaining that. We really appreciate that. And I think our listeners are going to appreciate that as well. And so as you were sharing all of those things, I feel like it always kind of came back to that, like, that's the experience of the separation and coming back to unity or coming back to oneness. And it feels like that essentially is the journey, is how do we come back to that sense of we are one, that oneness, that unity. And so I'm curious if I want to shift the conversation a little bit into maybe if you can explain from your perspective, what does that actually mean? Like the law of one, or to be in unity with the divine. And what does that, how do you begin to bridge that gap? And is there a connection there with the 4D consciousness, and kind of want to go in that direction?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with this analogy for oneness. If you think about your body, the physical body, like, let me ask you, what do you think would happen if each cell in your body believed it was a separate cell and had to go out into your body and find its own purpose and meaning and make its own way? Like, hopefully you guys allow swearing on this podcast, but like, you would be fucked. You would die instantly. You know what I mean? If your cells weren't all working together in harmony. And so think about the universe like one great being or body of the creator, and each sentient being is just like a cell. You can see how, especially on our planet, like the more cells start to become separate cells and believe that they're on their own and not part of the body, the more entropy and chaos happens on the planet. And so it would be no different than your own body if that happened, right? So health and wholeness and life depends on oneness and cooperation. And I also have a chapter on that in the book where I teach this idea that all things exist in relationship. And that to me is oneness, or what oneness means. Oneness doesn't mean what a lot of people assume it means, which is that there's no uniqueness between us and no diversity in creation. We're all just one kind of bland thing, which we call God. It's like, no. Oneness absolutely loves uniqueness and diversity. Look around you. Look in the universe. Everything is different. There's not two things exactly alike in the universe. And so there's infinite room for uniqueness and diversity in the universe of oneness. It doesn't mean we're all like homogeneous automatons or something. But here's what it does mean to say all is one. It means everything exists in relationship, and you cannot get out of this fact. Even as I sit here, I'm in relationship to the the chair I'm sitting on, the floor that's holding the chair, the oxygen I'm breathing, the water I'm drinking, the people I'm talking to, my thoughts. I'm in relationship to everything I experience. And so when you know that, you go, oh yeah, life is relationship, and it's happening constantly and relentlessly, and you can't get out of this. So you might as well get used to it. When I came to that conclusion of, oh, that's what oneness means, everything's connected, everything depends on everything else, then the concept of relationship became very important for me to understand the metaphysics of what is relationship and how does it work? What's a good relationship or versus a bad relationship? I want to know the first principles, right? And thankfully, A Course in Miracles has a lot to say about this and has taught me a lot about this. And all I really did was take the sort of framework that ACIM lays out and just kind of filled in the missing details in my mind. Because what A Course in Miracles teaches is that love is giving and receiving. You can't call it love if both giving and receiving aren't present. And so those are both not so much actions or verbs, but they're states of being. So like, am I in the state of giving right now? Am I in the state of receiving right now? And I want to understand what it means to say that. And so the state of giving means I'm always looking to bless, to serve, to help, to heal, to give the best I can give to the person right in front of me. Like this is an attitude, it's a disposition you have to cultivate where you're not all self-focused and like withholding and, keeping your energy to yourself, but like, no, bless everyone you meet with that energy. Because as you bless others, you bless yourself and your own polarity increases, yeah? So I've got to be giving all the time. Everyone I meet, I should be having an intention of, how can I bless this person right now? Even if it's just a smile, like I'm giving love, I'm giving kindness, I'm giving them my ear, I'm listening. You can always give, no matter what situation you're in. Giving is a state of being. What about receiving? Well, receiving, to me, more so is acceptance or surrender or trust. To be in the state of receiving means I always receive what life gives me. Whatever moment arises, there isn't even a thought of resistance about it. It's just, what do I need to do? What am I being asked to do? But I always accept whatever happens. I never resist. That's the state of receiving. And so love/relationship, I call it loving relationship as well, that is mastering those two states, giving and receiving. And so that is God's version of relationship. And when you look around at the universe, everything is in that state. The sun is giving its rays, the moon is giving its light, the water, the ocean is giving its nourishment to the people. Like everything is exchanging and giving and receiving energy for the universe to exist and go on. And so you go, oh, this is just natural law. Everything's in a state of giving and receiving. So that's true relationship. But what about the ego's version of relationship? And we know metaphysically that the ego is just an exact inversion of the creator. It's supposed to be, it's meant to be an exact polarity to God's nature. And so the ego's version of relationship is just the exact opposite of giving and receiving. And so the exact opposite of giving and receiving is taking and keeping, or taking and withholding. So rather than giving, the ego wants to withhold. It doesn't want to give its goodies away to others because ego believes that giving is losing, right? What I give is what I lose, says the ego. And A Course in Miracles says, no, what you give is what you increase in yourself. I mean, something like that. Giving is increasing. Giving is proof of having. That is a Course line. When you give something, love, kindness, generosity, gratitude, patience, kindness, forgiveness, whatever you give to another, you instantly make yourself the source of that quality. Duh. So if I give it, I must be the source of it. It must come from within me because I am the giver of it. So ego doesn't want to do that. It wants to withhold and keep to itself. And what is the opposite of receiving but taking, right? Taking is the opposite of receiving. And taking is like another word for using. Ego wants to use everything for its own benefit. It wants to use every relationship, even its closest friends and family. Everything is like a form of self-enhancement to the ego. It's always looking to enhance itself. And so it'll be a good friend to you so long as you have something to give to it. But as soon as you can't give the ego anything, bye-bye. Ego wants nothing to do with you because there's no real love there. It's all about the ego. So taking and keeping is the negative polarity of giving and receiving. And so I teach this a lot in 40U. I teach it in the book that if you can get this framework into your consciousness and you can just start surveying every moment of your life and sort of like the 3 beliefs, you can just ask these really simple questions of, am I in a state of giving and receiving right now? If you feel triggered, if there's overwhelm, whatever, like, am I in giving and receiving, or am I stepping now into taking and keeping? And as soon as you notice you're stepping into the ego's domain or the ego's thought system of taking and keeping, then it's just a simple redirection back to truth, back to love again. But it's the exercise is doing that over and over and over again, every day, day after day. It's a new muscle you have to build because your brain is just like a cornfield or something. If you've always walked this one way through the cornfield, you've got a nice, well-worn path, right? No resistance, no trouble. You can just walk right through the cornfield. But if that path leads to suffering, you don't want to walk down that path, even though it's a clear path, right? You want to forge a new path. And so you've got to push down those corn stalks and push your way through the cornfield, which is uncomfortable and not easy and tedious and time-consuming. But after enough trips trying to forge this new path, eventually the stalks stay down, they lay down, and you have a clear path you can walk through. And so that's what we're doing in our brain when we do these spiritual practices of requalifying and forgiving and all these things, is we're forging new neural pathways in our mind, and we're abandoning the old ones to eventually be replaced again by nature and disappear. And so if I want to forge a new path, I got to walk that path every day. So for me, it's not just the simplicity of these kinds of teachings that work so well, because if you just read the book and understand it, you're like, oh, this makes sense. Like, light bulb. Great. That's definitely going to produce some good fruit in your life. But the true saving power of these teachings cannot come to you by any other way than every single day being devoted to living this truth. I will make sure as much as I possibly can to remain in the state of giving and receiving always, which means being in my heart. I will always be in my heart. And if I notice I'm stepping into ego, I forgive myself. I forgive the ego. I get back into the heart. And that's not sexy. That's not a cutting edge spiritual practice to most people, to practice forgiveness and staying in your heart. People want the fun stuff, right? And there's a lot of merit to the fun stuff. It has great benefit as well. Third eye gazing and plant medicines. It's all fantastic. But the real, like, where the rubber meets the road on the spiritual path, I've noticed, is actually just, it's not the ability to do the amazing things so much as it is the ability to do the very simplest things over and over and over. And that's what makes a true spiritual master, right?
Absolutely. I love that so much. And we've touched on that with Cristina as well on the podcast, and how it boils down to very simple things. And yes, it's not so sexy, but in practical real life, that's just how it looks like. And it's sometimes pretty simple. So again, to put it in very practical terms, What does that look like in everyday life for you? And are there any practices that helped you like step into this other level of consciousness and really embodying all that you've told us about?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's so many different attitudes I could mention here that are helpful, but I think the foundational one is the one that deals with that third belief we mentioned, that is the most challenging one of control. The remedy, the medicine for the belief in control is trust and surrender. And again, that's not seen as like a sexy, attractive spiritual practice. People want to do Kriya yoga or meditation or whatever, but do you want to really just not stress about your life every day when challenging things happen? That's really hard to do. It's really hard not to personalize the things that happen in your life. But this is the recognition we need. If we're going to expand our awareness, which is the whole goal of the spiritual path, we have to get out of this tiny little localized bubble world of the ego that only sees itself and its own desires and fears and cares about nothing else. So we got to zoom out from that perspective, because there's no winning from this perspective. So when you zoom out from the finite mind's perspective, you realize, oh, wow, like I'm just one little tiny finite mind floating in an infinite universe. So I can't possibly know the reason why things happen. I can't possibly know what's going to happen tomorrow. These cosmic forces are far above my pay grade, right? I can't know, and I'm not supposed to know, because there's one who does know, and I'm going to put my trust in that one. And that's good enough for me. You know better than I, God. And that attitude, I think, in a way, it culminates the entire spiritual path, is the ability to have that heart set, I like to say. Because in that heart set or mindset is every spiritual truth there is. It is the total recognition that God is omnipotent and there is no other, right? Isaiah 45:5, beside me, there is none else. So how often do we introduce another in our mind when we fear what's happening or what's going to happen, or we try to take control over life because we don't trust what life's trying to do instead? These are the ways that our behaviors betray the things we say we believe, right? Any good spiritual person would be like, oh yeah, I know God's in control. I already know God's one and God's the only power in the universe. I know all that stuff. Could write a book about it. But do you live that way? Do you live as if you really knew that? Because that's a whole different ball game. And so again, nobody has the ability to just hear the truth once and then perfectly live it and embody it, because we have this thing called a mind that has to process information, and it goes into the subconscious and our programming, and it's this whole process going on. So I don't need to worry about, can I fully embody this teaching 100% that I just learned? No, you can't. It's not going to happen. Can you just embody it 1% more than yesterday? And again, not as attractive of an attitude. Everybody wants the shortcut. Everybody wants the fastest path from A to B. Tell me what I need to do to get enlightened today, fast food enlightenment. And some rare beings do get that, right? Ramana Maharshi, Eckhart Tolle, it does happen, but it is the extraordinary exception and not the rule. So you might as well not bank on you being the extraordinary exception to that rule. Just bank on the fact that I'm probably also following that rule, that enlightenment takes time and progression and dedication and commitment. And that's how our souls are evolving in this life. That's why we come here, to meet life. And so I think there's this really challenging duality between the absolute kind of realm or truth and the relative realm, the divine and the personal, in that so often people come into the spiritual journey, and especially with like non-duality teachings, and they want to dismiss the human side of things so much because, well, I learned this truth that all is one. And the Upanishads say that there is no ego, there's no person, it's all Maya. So I dismiss and ignore my ego. Whatever the person wants, it's an illusion. I'm just pure awareness. And it's like, yes, that's true from the absolute realm. You're right. But guess what? You're not living just in the absolute realm. You are living in the relative realm as well. You are experiencing being a person, a human being in a body in a finite lifetime. And so you have to get used to that and bring that along the journey and not try to leave it behind and chop it off and get rid of it. And I'm speaking here from experience. I did this to myself, kind of non-dual gaslighting myself for probably close to a decade before I realized the unbelievable consequences that can happen from that. Over those years, for example, I would have certain traumas happen, especially in relationships. And when these traumatic moments would happen, I would go to A Course in Miracles and non-duality and say, oh, I know what to do now. I just got really hurt by what she just did or said. And so I'm going to forgive her. She's the Christ. She's not the ego. I'm not the ego. I'm the Christ. All is one. Nothing really happened. It's all forgiven. And it actually would help. It would make me feel better in that moment. But what I didn't know is that all that pain and shock that I felt was already being put into the repository of the subconscious mind, where it would lie hidden for some extended period of time. So like you can go through the spiritual journey really truly believing that you're fully healed from certain traumas and just have no idea how much of that is waiting in the wings for you when you get re-triggered again in 4 years, when you get into another long-term relationship or whatever, right? It's gonna come up at some point and you're gonna face the full weight of that emotional pain. And that's what happened to me is I had these huge die-offs of stored trauma that I thought for all I was worth that I avoided being traumatized by it because I was applying the non-duality to it. And it's like, yes, your soul applied the non-duality and your soul knows what's true and your soul wasn't permanently affected by that experience, but your the human animal brain and being that you are was traumatized. And you can't deny that and you can't ignore that. And so all you can actually do is meet it and come close to it and love it and make it feel like it has a home with you rather than trying to chop it off and get rid of it because it's painful. I sort of realized like, hey, by the time you have a negative emotional reaction, you already got traumatized. It's too late to apply non-duality and try to swing your way out of it. And so those are the things you learn on the spiritual path of doing this daily practice of every day I get up and I forgive everything in my mind that is not of love. I practice humility. I practice always trusting life. The non-sexy things get you the biggest results on the spiritual path. And I think that's kind of the paradoxical nature that the Creator designed it to be, is like everybody wants to do the grandiose stuff. And it's very unattractive to do these things to the ego, right? Ego doesn't want to forgive. Ego doesn't want to trust and surrender, but that's why they work, right?
Amazing. Oh, I love that so much. So everything that you've been sharing about and teaching about is so powerful. And something that came up too, just as we were talking about the like this with the trauma and how it's in the body and also just everything about the oneness and what we were talking about there. I'm curious to know what you would say to people, you know, when it comes to when we're navigating on a collective level, things that are going on in the world and we see things happening like wars, chaos, like this and that. And how do we bring through these teachings in helping us to understand? Because I know, you know, obviously people listen to the news, read things, whatever, and it can create the fear and it create the anxiety. And so how do we navigate it when it feels like it's something that's so like, it's almost like we're maybe removed from our life because it's not happening directly to me, but I'm seeing what's happening in the world. And so how do we navigate that part with everything that you're teaching and sharing?
Yeah, the question of the hour. How do these teachings help us navigate the insane world we find ourselves in?
Exactly.
You know, I think it's actually very simple in one sense, which is we need to learn to just drop all of the perspectives that we know are not true, that are illusions, like death, for example. The belief that when somebody in this realm dies, they've been blotted out of existence for eternity. What a travesty. Well, why does it feel so shitty to believe that? Why does it bring so many negative emotions up to believe when my aunt dies? My aunt's gone forever. She's been annihilated by the universe. You know, why does that feel so bad? Because it's not true. That's why it feels bad. The universe is going, no, everything's eternal, dude. This is like a little video game you're playing. This isn't some big deal. Like life is just a school where our souls come to learn. And so let's drop the belief that when somebody dies, they've been blotted out of existence. They're just going from one life to the next. They're an eternal being. And that is a very respectful and loving way to see another soul. It's like, I'm not going to diminish you in my mind to this little finite piece of plastic that can get ripped out of the universe upon death. You are a fractal of God itself. You are a divine being. You are a divine idea in the mind of God right now. You can't die. You just take one body to the next forever and ever and ever. So that's a perspective that feels really good to hold. And why? Because it's true. So when we learn to heal our perspectives of the world, we stop, number one, being so triggered by the world and what happens, and then we stop adding more negative energy to it. Because what I judge, what I hate, what I resist in my mind, I'm adding that negative energy to whatever the object is. So I don't want to go around holding judgments and fear and things in my mind, because I'm just adding more of that energy into the collective consciousness. I want to help heal the collective consciousness, which means I can't hold those beliefs in my mind. I can't react in those ways anymore to the world, or I'm just another part of the problem, and I have no right to complain about the world. So instead, we say, I want to see things the way God sees them. And when we ask God to show us, how do you see this seemingly horrible event, this genocide in Gaza or whatever, how do I see this from your perspective? Because God also is aware of it, and God is not suffering. So that means I can be aware of it and not suffer. But I can't do that if I don't have the same perspectives God has. And so does God see anyone as a finite being who gets wiped out when they die? No. God sees his eternal children going from one life to the next, learning lessons like children in school, first grade, second grade, third grade. Imagine if all the second graders thought that their friends died when they graduated second grade. It'd be pretty sad, right, at graduation. But because they know we're just going from one grade to the next, they can't wait for summer break, right? We can have a similar attitude about being a human being of like, this is just one little grade in my soul's evolution. And this is why I love the law of one so much, which you brought up earlier, because the law of one gives us the most beautifully satisfying answers to these exact questions you're asking of, why do we come here? Why is the world so screwed up? What's the purpose of it all? Are we moving towards something? Is there a teleology to this? And the law of one says, oh yes, the universe has more meaning and purpose to it than any of us have imagined before. And it has more intelligence and structure than any of us have imagined before. And so it goes into this model of the densities and explains that this planet is in the third density of consciousness out of the 7. And it just so happens that the third density is by far the most difficult and challenging density in the whole universe. And so that's actually another great perspective to keep in mind, is like, I'm playing the hardest level of the game right now. Like, the universe is so incredibly merciful and benevolent and wonderful and good that this, the human lifetime, is basically as hard as it gets in the universe in terms of the suffering we have to go through. It's like, wow, it's actually not so bad, right? It's hard, don't get me wrong. Human life is really hard, but if this is the worst there is in the universe, that's some pretty good news, right? And Ra says, yes, indeed. In fact, fourth density, which is, for example, the density that most extraterrestrials we see that have physical bodies like ours that we hear about or know about, those are fourth density beings. And so they're significantly more intelligent, significantly more evolved. And Ra explains what their consciousness is like, that they live in absolute joy and bliss and love. They're in the fourth density of the heart chakra. So they're in the love density of consciousness. We're in the third, the control density of consciousness, being separate, being a human, making my own way. That's just where we're at. It's like a grade in school. And so I think, I can only speak for myself, of course, but for me, holding those perspectives has just done miracles in my consciousness, especially, since COVID and stuff. Like, I would have had a lot harder time with COVID and all of the dark realities that were surfacing in our world, and we're becoming aware of the unbelievable tyranny and power control games going on at the highest levels of our planet. It was a pretty terrifying few years for a lot of people to have these realizations. And I'm not going to say I didn't have moments of fear either, but to be able to hold a greater perspective in your awareness and just understand it's just part of a game I'm playing right now. This isn't what's ultimately real or lasting. This is just for a reason, for a season. I'm here to learn and grow. So while I'm here, let me take the curriculum, right? Let me meet the human experience fully and every catalyst it has to offer and squeeze all the juice out of it. Because what I really don't want to do is fail this grade and have to come back again and take it all over again, which we call reincarnation. And the sages of old have always said that, the vast majority of human souls do have to retake third density grade 100 plus times very often before they finally learn the curriculum and graduate. But that's why I love the law of one, because the law of one says, well, let me tell you exactly what the curriculum is. It's not a mystery. You're in the third density, solar plexus density, trying to get to the fourth, heart chakra density. So you just need to understand what are the lessons in the fourth density and try to learn them where you are. And then when your soul graduates from this lifetime, it's going to be analyzed by your higher self to say, how much of the fourth density lessons did this soul learn? And Ra says, if you learn 51% or greater of them, if you can live from your heart 51% of the time or greater, your higher self sees you as eligible for fourth density graduation. And so your soul can go on to the next density realm after this lifetime, which is much more harmonious and has its own challenges. But Ra says there's something like 100 times less suffering in the fourth density everywhere in the universe than there is in the third density. So those are a few of the perspectives I keep in mind every day when I see the news cycle. And they really do just allow me to stay fully grounded and at peace, but also connected to the realities of suffering. It isn't a detached thing. It's like, even though I know these souls are not being blotted out in Gaza, like my heart still goes out for the suffering they're experiencing, and they don't know they're eternal. So they're suffering like they're really dying and their loved ones are dying. And that's a horrible place to be. And so I think when we love everyone, when we live from the heart, we're always sending out prayers of love and good intentions to everyone and everywhere in the world. When there's a disaster in Syria, I'm sending love to Syria in my mind, but I'm not suffering over what's going on there because I know the truth that those are eternal beings and they're going to be okay. And I think, what if everybody did that? What if 10% of the planet, whatever negative news comes up, we send prayers of love in that direction? Like, I can only imagine the impact we would have globally if we all could start seeing the world that way.
Absolutely. If we could focus all of our energy in that and in love, as opposed to all the other things that we do, and the panic and the lack of control and everything that we seem to spiral, the more that we see these things around us. So definitely the world would be very different. So, and we just started talking about something new that we could talk about for a very long time, and the seven levels of consciousness and stepping into that fourth density. I think it's so interesting. So we're almost halfway there if you think about it. So but for someone who's just beginning to awaken and kind of stepping into that and striving for that, to step into the fourth density consciousness for the first time, what's the one message and one thing that you'd like them to hear and know?
The one thing, huh?
Where do we start?
Well, I'm going to go with A Course in Miracles, because I think ACIM does really nail this one. I actually love reading and studying the Law of One and A Course in Miracles together, almost like as companion texts, because they really just make perfect dance partners, in my opinion, because the Law of One lays out kind of the map of the territory, the what and the why of the universe. Like, what is the universe and why is the universe? Law of One answers those two questions in an amazing way. And the Law of One gets a little bit into the how. Ra is asked in a few of the sessions, like, how do we graduate to fourth density? And Ra stresses forgiveness heavily and some other things, mostly catalyst integration, which is their term for learning the lessons in your life. Every experience that happens to you is a catalyst, which can be either for your learning and betterment or your detriment and your ignorance, depending on how you handle it. So they focus on those two things. But A Course in Miracles is like the tour guide for the map, right? A Course in Miracles really grabs you by the hand and says, follow me, I'll take you to the fourth density. And it teaches you the practice of forgiveness and teaches you all about the ego. Ego is third density consciousness, by the way, literally is third density consciousness. And it teaches you what the ego is and how to transcend it through the practice of forgiveness. But the caveat is that forgiveness is not really something you do, right? It's more of your perception. The way you see is forgiveness. And so if you have judgment in your perception, if you're seeing anyone as inferior or superior, you're not in forgiveness, you're in judgment. And so where one is, the other's not. And so forgiveness is more of a way of perceiving reality that you come to, which we defined earlier as trust and surrender, right? Everything is perfect because God is omnipotent. God is in full control of God's universe. There is not a centimeter of it outside of God's control. Again, we all say we know that, but how often do our behaviors and responses to life betray that knowing? So it's got to be practiced, and forgiveness is the practice. So forgiveness to me is more of, well, the Course defines it as a shift in perception from fear to love, right? So how many times a day are you shifting your perception would be the question I would ask. When you're in a negative emotion, when you're in judgment, when you're angry, anything, are you becoming aware of that? Going, wow, I'm in a negative emotion right now, or I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. And whatever it is that is causing that emotion, can you forgive it and forgive the ego's thoughts and perceptions that caused that emotion, right? Because remember, the emotions are never the problem. Emotions are always our friends. Even the negative emotions are our best friends. They're messengers from our inner world coming to alert us to danger in our mind. But it's like if I'm about to drive off a cliff and I fall asleep at the wheel, do I want somebody to gently rub my back and whisper tenderly that I'm about to drive off a cliff? Like, no, I want somebody to slap me on the back of the head as fast and as hard as they can to wake me up, right? I'm headed for certain danger. That's what negative emotions are, right? If they felt good and easy breezy, like you wouldn't know anything was wrong with your perception. It has to hurt. It has to be a pattern interrupt, right? And so often the negative emotion becomes the pattern only because we're not aware of what it's saying. Sadness is saying, you've got a lack belief at play right now. Anger is saying, you're attached to an outcome right now. And fear is saying, you believe you're in control right now. So when I know that, I can just forgive those thoughts and beliefs and just go right back to love again. And it's that simple shifting my perception away from ego's thought system, away from judgment, away from resistance, and to acceptance, opening, trust, love, humility. These are the qualities that produce happiness in daily living and spiritual evolution. And so you've been given free will, right? The Creator's not going to force you to shift your perception. In fact, this is another cool teaching from the Law of One, is that the Creator is actually fully cool with you choosing either polarity. If you want to be full negative polarity, just full demon mode, the Creator says, thy will be done. I would never infringe on your choice. So the Creator doesn't bat an eye at light or darkness. It's all good from the Creator's realm. It's all serving a purpose. So you have to choose which polarity you want. And this is what A Course in Miracles says. This is what a Law of One says, and other texts I could name, the Didache. There's this theme that in every moment, we are making a choice between truth and illusion, or love and fear, right? And if we know that there's always a choice being made between the truth, what is actually true in reality, and what is not true or false or illusory, and the more we know that that choice is always being made, the more we will naturally want to make the choice for truth and love. But it's due to our ignorance, right, that we don't really always know, or we're not really aware of the fact that I'm choosing between love and fear in every moment, the way I respond to everything, the way I respond to my thoughts, right? As we said, it's all relationship. And there's only two kinds of relationship, giving and receiving, or taking and keeping. Taking and keeping is fear and illusion. Giving and receiving is love and truth. And there isn't a third state, right? There isn't a third option. You have to choose. And so forgiveness is the daily choosing of the light, choosing love, choosing what's really true. And it's not always easy. Most of the time it isn't easy. But the difficulty of an obstacle shows you the reward it's going to offer you, right? So the harder a challenge is, the more spiritual benefit it's going to produce. And that's yet another perspective that when you learn it, it gives you the motivation and the faith and the knowing that every challenge in my life is fully worth the squeeze, right? It's fully worth going all in, doing everything I can to learn this lesson, to pass this test, because there are eternal rewards awaiting me. The evolution of my consciousness that I get from passing these daily tests is an eternal gift that I never lose, right? Consciousness only expands and it never can contract. It can't go backwards in evolution, in other words. And so that's also a very motivating perspective to hold, because then you don't cower at your life challenges anymore, but you rise to meet them with faith in your heart, knowing this is brought to me by my creator who loves me and who I love. It's for my highest good, but this is going to be tough. Let's get through this, right? And you can have both. You can have absolute and relative perspectives together, where you can acknowledge the severity of the human element, whatever it is, loss of a loved one, finance. Don't pretend like things aren't hard. Don't pretend like it's not a challenge. Just meet the challenge from the absolute perspective, from the light.
So beautiful. Oh, I love that so much. And so many enlightening nuggets of wisdom. So I just want to say thank you for that. So beautiful hearing all of this.
Oh, my pleasure. Many angelic frequencies, right?
Exactly.
Right. And back to basics, just embracing forgiveness and love every day. And let that be the choice and let that lead the way. So simple, so beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Amazing. So as we wrap up, even though I don't want to, because I'm like this, I could talk for hours and keep asking you questions. But the final thing is, Aaron, if you don't mind sharing with our audience, where most importantly, we can pre-order your upcoming book and any other places in the online realm where people can connect with you, learn more about you, connect with your work, and just in general, stay in connection with you.
Sure. Yeah. The book's easy to find. You just type The 3 Beliefs of Ego on Amazon and the book will come up there. It's published on August 12th. I don't know when this episode will be released, but it's like less than a month away now, basically. So that's where you can get the book. And then I also have an online sort of spiritual academy called 4D University, where I teach all these teachings in a kind of systematic curriculum of programs. There's 3 kind of main programs we have now, and then we have some beginner tier ones as well. So there's kind of something for everybody. So if you're interested in that, you can either just follow me on social media and you'll see my posting about it, or you can go to 4duniversity.com to check out some of the programs and what they're all about and if it might resonate with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to check out all the things. And like I said, I'm so excited for that book to come out and to have it in my hands. So just want to say thank you for your time here. Thank you for sharing this space with us. We appreciate it so much. And I know that our listeners are going to love everything that we talked about today.
Yeah, thank you so
much. You guys
much.
asked fantastic questions. So it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate the conversation and look forward to doing it again soon.
Amazing.
Hopefully we get a part 2. We have so much more to talk about. So
we just cracked the tip of the iceberg, you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.